In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Pork. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be with David Glenn. And this Saturday, we'll be in Raleigh for the big tip between Clemson and NC State. Come see us 11 a.m. on Saturday at Backyard Bistro. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're watching or listening on, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeart, and tell your friends about the show, too. We really appreciate your support. It's another big week here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Thursday morning, 9 a.m., the David Glenn Show. DG and Mike Waddell from Charlotte to preview ACC basketball, which, hard to believe, begins in less than 2 weeks. And then Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., Wild Dogs and Hogs. Mike sits down with Coach Jimmy Collins to talk all things college football. All right, let's get into it with DG now. Time to break the huddle, presented by the original Saltworks. And DG, we'll start with the big game in Tallahassee this past week. Florida State turns back Duke 38-20, but the score doesn't indicate how close that game actually was through three quarters.
I agree with you, Chris. I mean, Florida State looked like the number 4 team in the nation, but at the same time, to me at least, Duke looked like the number 16 team in the nation. So no disrespect at all to the Blue Devils. And to your point, the Devils led 20-17 until early in the fourth quarter of that game. So anyone who only saw 38-20 might not realize the Seminoles put up 21 fourth quarter points to make that the final score. And most will circle, of course, the injury or re-injury to that ankle for Duke quarterback Riley Leonard. It is fair to say that the complexion of the game changed and dramatically in FSU's favor when Riley Leonard was knocked out, tried to talk Mike Elko into letting him back in, did not win that argument. And as we said last week, there was no way Henry Beelan IV, all due respect to the redshirt freshman, was going to lead the Devils to a win in Tallahassee against such a quality opponent. But I would add one more thing to that asterisk about Riley Leonard. He did play almost 3 quarters, and the Devils still threw for the game for only 76 yards. So, most of that was with Riley Leonard. So it's not as simple as saying the game ended when Riley Leonard wasn't in there. Bottom line is Florida State's a little bit more talented, a little deeper, a little better at the line of scrimmage. And when Jordan Travis needed to make plays on those fourth quarter drives, he did so with his arm, he did so with his feet, and he had more weapons than the Blue Devils had for either Riley Skinner or Beelan. So credit to the Devils for putting up a good fight into the fourth quarter, but credit to the Seminoles. They're the best team in this league this year. There's no doubt about it, at least for now. And they are in the driver's seat for both, of course, a trip to the ACC title game, but they'll be the favorite there in Charlotte in early December. And they have a chance of representing the ACC in this final year of the college football playoff as well.
We'll talk more about the Seminoles and the Blue Devils in a little bit. How about North Carolina? Really stunning loss for the Tar Heels at home Saturday night to Virginia, 31-27. Look, Virginia's off a bye week, so they were playing inspired football, but a really disappointing night for Mack Brown and the Tar Heels.
No doubt about it. I mean, Mack Brown's track record and reputation deserves both the positives that are obvious, right? He won a national championship at Texas, and he led the Longhorns to a lot of other Big 12 titles and 10 or more win seasons. The guy's already in the Hall of Fame. And in my eyes, he's produced a couple of the best teams in UNC football history. So those are all real. What's also real is that Mack Brown's reputation includes the lay an egg game against a team that you're supposed to not only beat, but beat by a lot. And remember, a year ago, Chris, that opponent was Georgia Tech, and the Heels were a double-digit favorite and 9-1. And they not only lost to the Yellow Jackets, that started the wheels coming off for Carolina, going from 9-1 and in the national conversation and Drake May's in the Heisman conversation to that 9-5 disappointing final record. I mean, against the Cavaliers, the Heels were a 24-point favorite. And I know Tony Elliott, former Clemson offensive coordinator, had that extra week in the kitchen to kind of cook things up. He did a great job, and Carolina did a poor job because Virginia was the worst rushing offense in the ACC. Their quarterback, Tony Muskett, didn't run hardly at all this season. He ran for 60-plus yards against the Tar Heels. Two of the running backs also had 60-plus yards. So the Heels, who, as we've said all season long, while really good in a lot of places and great in a couple places, obviously quarterback with Drake May, running back with Omarion Hampton, wide receiver now that Tez Walker is playing, they're not great at the line of scrimmage. The Heels are not a dominating offensive line, and they're not a dominating defensive line. And what that recipe usually leads to at some point is inconsistency. So I don't shoot down anybody who has the Mac Brown theory of his teams will always lay an egg eventually. I'm not even saying you're wrong. What I'm saying is that there's also a personnel element to this. It is that the Heels have a hard time getting off the field on defense sometimes. And the Cavaliers, with that running attack, controlled the clock, kept Drake May on the sidelines. For some reason, the Heels went away from calling running plays for Omarion Hampton, even though he was having a really good day rushing the ball against an inferior Virginia defense. You could say play calling, you could say the Mac Brown issue, but it's also personnel. And unlike a Florida State, which is pretty darn good at the line of scrimmage, the Heels and some of these second-tier ACC teams can be really good in a lot of places. But, man, if you're just okay in the trenches, it's going to catch up to you eventually. And the Cavaliers made the Tar Heels pay for that exactly.
All right, what about the game that we were at with our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus last week? Furman on the road at Western Carolina. The Paladins get it done with a 29-17 win over the Catamounts. And now Furman really in control of that Southern Conference race.
Yeah, actually, it's a good building on the theme of the trenches. When the Catamounts had the ball, their star quarterback, Cole Gonzalez, was under a lot of pressure from the Furman defensive line. I was saddened, and don't let me forget to mention, and I think I can speak on behalf of Mike Waddell of our staff as well. We loved our trip to Cullowhee. Please don't allow me to forget to say that. They rolled out the red carpet for us. The fans came up to us in droves, threw footballs, had fun with us. We had great interns helping us out with that. We loved the trip. We loved the atmosphere. We loved the football. We loved reconnecting with some old friends. So it was a wonderful trip overall. And the football was high-caliber football. But when Furman had the ball, the Catamounts had a hard time stopping the running game. Furman's offensive line controlled the Catamounts' defensive front. And flip it around, not only did the Furman front not dominate, but limited the Western front, but the star running back for the Catamounts. I was really looking forward to seeing Gonzalez at quarterback, one of the most efficient passers in the Southern Conference. He was not great, but you could see how talented he is. Sadly, Desmond Reed, who to me is like a candidate for the SoCon Player of the Year. He's a Florida guy. He's a running back. He's a sophomore, big-time talent. I think he had only 3 touches before he got knocked out of the game with an injury. I'm not saying that was the difference in a 29-17 game, but obviously any team that loses one of its best players for the majority of the game, you're going to feel it. But it was fun to see, the 2 best teams in the SoCon, 2 of the dozen or so best teams in all of FCS football. Really good crowd on hand, even though the students, unfortunately, were on break at Western Carolina, and that complicated it a little bit. I still think Kerwin Bell has something cooking in Cullowhee, and I wouldn't be surprised if those guys are headed to the FCS playoffs later this year, along with the Furman Paladins, who, of course, are top 5 in the nation, and deservedly so.
A couple of teams that are still struggling as we get toward the latter half of the college football season. One of them, Appalachian State, the Mountaineers, a 28-21 loss to Old Dominion. The struggle is continuing for Sean Clark's club.
Yeah, that's a massive disappointment, and we're going to talk about coaching hot seats a little bit later. But the reality to me, Sean Clark is an offensive guy, and I still think that the Mountaineers, while not productive enough in that 28-21 loss at ODU, I still, to me, they look like a well-coached offense. They're using their backup quarterback in Joey Aguilar. He's pretty good. They're missing their star running back, Nate Noel, which, again, like Desmond Reed at Western Carolina, you're going to feel that no matter how good your backup running back is. Sean Clark's an offensive line guy. Most weeks, I like how the Mountaineers play up front. What showed up against ODU and what I think is at the center of this Mountaineers team's problems is that they just don't have that wrecking ball in the defensive front seven. And you and I in recent years, and Mike, of course, is a former voice of the Mountaineers, they had a guy named Demetrius Taylor on the defensive line that not only dominated the Sun Belt, I mean, he dominated the Tar Heels and some of the others that the Mountaineers had on the schedule. They had a linebacker named DeMarco Jackson, who was not only the wrecking ball, he was the defensive player of the year in the Sun Belt. So there's two guys in your front seven. I think they were both 2 years ago. But those first two Sean Clark teams at App, I thought were well-balanced and really, really hard to beat. I just don't see those monsters on the defensive front for the Mountaineers. And as we were saying with the Tar Heels, if you're shaky in the trenches, it allows teams to keep your powerful offense off the field. It allows them to gain confidence in front of maybe a home crowd. And now, Sean Clark is in a difficult position with a 3-4 record and still some difficult opponents ahead.
Talk about a difficult position. Mike Houston finds himself in a really hard spot right now. Pirates continue their tailspin, a 10-7 loss at home to Charlotte on homecoming. We've talked about it really all season long, how inept this offense has been for ECU, and it continued on Saturday.
Yeah, and here's the bottom line. If you're Mike Houston, you're in year 5 at ECU. Your opponent on Saturday is Biff Poggi, year 1 at Charlotte. Both of these teams, seriously, statistically, this is not even my opinion, just points per game, are 2 of the worst offenses in the country. So the question becomes, who's going to figure out a way to get a win when both coaches know they don't have much artillery, if you will, offensively? Well, the answer was Charlotte. The answer was Biff Poggi. And it was ugly, 10-7, right? But when both coaches know where they're not very good, and it's not the fifth-year coach playing at home in front of the ECU fans at Dowdy-Ficklin who gets the win, that's going to get the Wolves howling even louder around Mike Houston. So we'll talk more hot seat a little bit later, but congrats to Biff Poggi and the 49ers. Both of those teams play pretty solid defense. It's been the offenses weighing the whole program down all season long. There is no easy answer for that for either team the rest of the way, but it's Biff Poggi who got to go back to Charlotte with a win, and it's Mike Houston sitting at 1-6 with some difficult games still ahead for him as well.
All right, when we come back, we'll have our Sport Clips MVP of the week presented by Sport Clips. Mike Waddell sits down with Coach Jimmy Collins to talk all things college football. That's coming up when we come back. But as we go to break, here are all of the scores from last week's games involving North Carolina college football teams with our Jimmy scoreboard right here on the Old North State Tailgate. The oldest restaurant in New Hanover County has a brand new look, feel, and taste, making it the #1 place for great food in Wrightsville Beach. Owner Jimmy Galeese and his wife Keaton have poured their hearts and soul into the reformation of this North Carolina coastal classic restaurant, and the impact has been fantastic. King Neptune serves fresh fish, chicken, and steak, and has an amazing wine and spirits to lift your dining experience to make it the best at the beach. Come taste the creations of Chef Chavez, and you'll know that you have tasted a little bit of heaven right there in Wrightsville Beach. That's King Neptune. Call them at 910-239-3055 and make your reservation now. King Neptune in Wrightsville Beach, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Welcome back to the Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Pork. I'm Chris Edwards with David Glenn. Don't forget to come out and see us on Saturday. We'll be in Raleigh for the Clemson-NC State matchup. Come see us beginning at 11 a.m. at Backyard Bistro. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. and tell your friends about the show too. We'd certainly appreciate your support. And check out the DG show Thursday morning, 9 a.m. All things ACC basketball with DG and Mike Waddell. Hard to believe we're getting close to hoop season in less than 2 weeks. All right, we're back with DG now. Time for our hot reads of the week presented by Lawson Insurance and High Street Insurance Partners. And we'll start kind of where we started our last segment, DG, with a couple of teams in our backyard, Duke and North Carolina. Despite losses last week, both of those teams still in control of their ACC destiny. Now, they will play each other on November 11th in what will be basically an ACC championship semifinal, an elimination game, basically, right? But the winner of that game could find themselves in the Orange Bowl if Florida State makes their way into the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think it's hard for most fans to have the hot read that's kind of optimistic or glass half full when their favorite team, whoever it might be, just lost at Florida State or just got surprised by Virginia and Kenan Stadium. But I think the reality is, and it's up to those coaches and players to kind of clear away the Halloween-style cobwebs and try to keep a clear focus moving forward. This is our 19th year, Chris, of the championship game format in ACC football. And we have a horrifically poor track record as a state with 4 ACC schools located in our backyard of getting to the ACC title game, much less winning it. So this is year 19. We have one ACC champion in this format. It was Wake Forest back in 2006. We do have other trips to the ACC title game, right? Carolina did it just last year under Mack Brown. Duke actually did it about a decade ago under David Cutcliffe. But it is a crown jewel, relatively speaking, for any of our in-state teams to get there. And the reality is, as we speak, those two teams, Duke and Carolina, have as good a chance of anybody else of being there most likely to play Florida State. You'd be an underdog, but football is a crazy sport. You don't know if the Seminoles are going to have an injury or two between now and early December that might make them a little bit more manageable of an opponent than what we saw beat the Blue Devils this last weekend. So it's win week by week, of course. Heck, win play by play, most coaches will tell you. But what the Tar Heels and the Blue Devils have to offer, the Heels offensively primarily, the Devils defensively primarily, it's good enough to get to the ACC title game this year. And when that's something your school has very rarely done, it's a very big deal. One quick postscript. Even, I know there's a long way to go, but even in the scenario where either Duke or Carolina, and Louisville and others have this dream as well, if you get to the ACC title game but lose to Florida State, not an unlikely scenario, right? If the Seminoles at that point have such a good resume that they're kind of pulled up to the 4-team college football playoff, guess where the runner-up of the ACC title game has a decent chance of going? How about the Orange freaking Bowl?
Yeah.
Now, you may be disappointed about losing to Virginia or losing to Florida State or losing an ACC title game. I guarantee you it's a lifelong memory if any of those young men or maybe even the coaches are playing in the Orange Bowl. Duke hasn't been in the Orange Bowl, Chris, since the 1950s. I wasn't even alive back then. And yes, Carolina's been there only one time, and it was recently under Mack Brown. But I think they'd feel more optimistic about their chances of winning if the cards unfolded that way this time. So whether it's that trip to Charlotte in early December or some of these other possibilities, I think the team that can lick its wounds and look forward rather than obsessing about what just happened, it's fun for me covering it that the Devils and the Heels have as good a chance of being in the ACC title game in Charlotte right here in our backyard as anybody else not named Florida State. So I hope fans and especially players can keep that perspective because a lot of these biggest goals are still attainable for these in-state teams.
Now for the other side of the coin, we teased it a little bit in our first segment. 2 coaches in our state really feeling the pressure on the hot seat now after losses last week. We mentioned ECU and Mike Houston. The Pirates now 1-6 after that loss to Charlotte, and Sean Clark and App State now 3-4 off their loss to Old Dominion. Those guys really feeling a lot of pressure as we go into the back half of the season.
Yeah, I think most fans understand this, but it's worth restating. Some schools are basketball-driven athletic departments, and the football coach gets a little bit of a longer leash. Other schools are absolutely, positively, no doubt about it, football-driven athletic departments. And there is not a shade of gray about the fact that both Appalachian State University and East Carolina University are football-driven athletic departments. They have other good sports, yes, they do, but financially, image-wise, brand-wise, it's football first at those two schools. Quick thing about Sean Clark, and I'm glad you brought up just the human element. I got to know Mike Houston pretty well, Sean Clark a little bit, and I genuinely like both men a lot. And it's not fun to talk about hot seat, but that is part of our job. Not so fun fact at App State. In the last 30 years, there have been only 2 non-winning seasons. That's how consistently successful they've been with the Mountaineers. FCS, 3-time national champion, but even in the Sun Belt, a lot of success under Scott Satterfield, Eli Drinkwitz, and even in the early Sean Clark era. If Sean Clark can't get to a bowl game this year, or if he's 6-6 or worse, that means he's responsible for 2 of the 3 examples in the last 31 years of not posting a winning season. When you've been there for years, that sounds like a pretty hot seat to me. At ECU, the dynamics are different because Mike Houston just went to 2 straight bowl games. It'll be interesting to see. John Gilbert, the ECU AD, probably will have a conversation with Mike Houston and ask him about his offensive coordinator, Donnie Kirkpatrick, who's been there the whole 5-year tenure of Mike Houston. And a lot of times an AD won't say, are you going to make any staff changes? Because if you don't, I might have to look at it as a head coaching problem. How that conversation goes varies depending on the AD, the coach, the circumstance. But that conversation happens all the time when you have a 5th-year train wreck, and that's not an exaggeration. They had 4 years of Holton Ahlers at quarterback. They planned miserably for his successor. They have all sorts of issues offensively, but quarterback's the most important position on the field, and they badly miscalculated that either Mason Garcia or Alex Flynn was going to be the answer at that position. That's on them as coaches. They have to answer for that. There's a scenario where Mike Houston stays, but he makes staff changes. But there's also a scenario where we have new head coaches in Boone and Greenville come next season.
A lot on the line, and I'm sure we're not done talking about this topic as the season moves ahead. Time now for our Sport Clips MVP of the Week, presented by Sports Clips. We send it over to Mike Waddell, who's sitting down with Coach Jimmy Collins to talk all things college football. Mike.
Thank you, Chris. And Coach, as we look into this week that has been and what will be coming up in college football, it is crazy right now. Teams losing games that they shouldn't lose. And one of the top teams in the nation, the University of Michigan, under a major cloud of scrutiny right now over in-person scouting. Now, your career goes back over 30 years. And you can remember before that 1994 rule was passed, when you could go out and scout in person. So my question to you is, what does a team or a coaching staff gain from seeing a team in person with a scout as opposed to just watching the game on tape, even if you have multiple angles?
Well, first of all, Mike, it's very difficult to win this day and time in college football unless you are the extreme elite of college football. And I'm talking about the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Michigans, the Ohio State, and we're talking about Michigan right now. The thing that you get with an in-person scouting is you're able to see much more. With the video that we receive, you really don't get a sideline shot. You try to. We all have done this. We all look at TV copies because you try to look at TV copies to see who the signaler is on the sidelines, to pick up anything you can off the sidelines, what they're using to signal in personnel, all of those things. So there's always somebody. Everybody has someone trying to pick up signals off TV copies, and even during the game, you're trying to pick up signals from the other team on the sidelines. It's no different than baseball. Stealing signs in baseball, we all do it, and it happens. It happens every single Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever league you're in. It's going to happen.
It seems like the Michigan program under Coach Harbaugh has just endured one controversy after another. How long does it take before it just becomes too much? If you're an AD at the University of Michigan, like Ward Manuel, how much patience do you have even with an alum like Harbaugh?
Well, I think you have to assess the damage that it does to your university and to your entire athletic department. Obviously, we're in a time, not that it's really changed at places like Michigan, that we're all expected to win, and winning is a part of what they do, and winning supplies the monies for every sport that they have and their entire athletic department. So just depends on how many complaints or how upset the trustees, the president, and et cetera, the people that make decisions, how upset are they about the negative publicity that they're receiving. And I think the other thing that will be determined is did Coach Harbaugh have anything to do with this person that so-called has been to 11 different Pac-10 or excuse me, Big Ten teams and watched them in person and bought tickets from those places? Did Coach Harbaugh send him to those places to scout, or did someone else do that? So a lot of ifs and buts in that comment I just made, but it could turn out to be very negative, and it may be the time where Jim Harbaugh says, "Hey, I've had enough of this. I've sat out 3 games. I'm being accused of cheating. It's time for me to go back to the NFL." And then an owner in that next league has to decide, do I want to put up with this crap or not? So we'll wait and see. It'll be interesting to see.
It really would be. But I tell you, the thing that you said right there, Coach, that really hits home to me is that it's hard to win a college football game. Over the weekend, I spend a lot of Saturday night and Sunday reading people's articles and their videos, watching those on YouTube, and just absorbing all of the content. And a lot of fans think, or it appears that they think, that it's really easy, and that just because good old State U that I'm a fan of used to be good back a few years ago, that we should always be good right now. And that probably could not be more true anywhere than Greenville right now, with what Mike Houston is going through with East Carolina. The Pirates are 1-6. They don't look good. A lot of people clamoring for Donnie Kirkpatrick to get the axe as the offensive coordinator for East Carolina. When you're in that position as an assistant coach, do you notice all of that? I would imagine it would be very, very difficult to block that out.
Well, we're all of us in this business, and I include myself in the business because I was in it for so long. We all place pressure on ourselves. We don't worry as much about the outside pressure as we do the pressure on the inside. And that pressure is self-applied, and it's applied by the staff, and you feel the responsibility to the players. I guarantee you Donnie Kirkpatrick's done this for a long time. He understands what the pressure is. He understands what losing a job or possibly losing a job is. And he certainly understands, and his disappointment is probably really obvious in that office in the way that they've played and the lack of production that they've had. So we don't need to look outside. But you look inside your own office, and there's plenty of pressure to be had from there.
Arkansas made a change with their offensive coordinator earlier this week, with head coach Sam Pittman letting Dan Enos go, the veteran offensive coordinator that had been a lot of different places, had really been highly regarded. And it's not like Dan forgot how to coach, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't clicking in Arkansas. When you go through a staff change like that, I don't know if you ever had to experience that with the staff that you were on, but how do you all of a sudden, right in the middle of the season, pick up the pieces and come up with a new game plan that is truly variant from what you had working on all the way back to the spring?
Well, obviously they'll need to stay somewhat similar to what Dan's package was, but I've never been through a mid-season change like that. So for me to comment on it and say what effect it would have would be unfair. But I do have a saying that we kind of live by in this business. It's not who gets the credit, it's who gets the blame. Eventually somebody is going to be, if it's not going well, somebody's going to get the blame. Obviously Dan Enos, and we just talked about Donnie Kirkpatrick, and there's a lot of people out there getting the blame. I listened to Coach Brown's post-game news conference after the Virginia game. Obviously, he took the blame on himself, but he also passed that blame along to the assistant coaches, and that's understandable. We understand that it's our job to get your position ready and your expertise ready to play. And if they don't play well, either you're not coaching them very well or they're not listening very well, and both are negative things to happen.
You talk about the North Carolina loss to Virginia. Having worked at both North Carolina and Virginia back to back in the early 90s, I know firsthand how intense this rivalry is, especially for the Stabs. And half of that equation is still, at least the head coach is the same, Mack Brown at North Carolina. I was working with him from 91 through 93 on the football side, and then worked with George Welsh from 94 through 96. North Carolina, Virginia is a rivalry that means more than just what's on the field that day. It means a lot in terms of recruiting. We've talked about that in the past. Mm-hmm. But this is a really tough trend right now for a North Carolina program, not this year's team, but a program that just cannot get over the hump. They win the games that they're supposed to win, except for one a year. Last year, it was Georgia Tech. This year, it's Virginia. Usually I would sit back and say none of that really matters because each team is its own. But that's a trend that is developing, and it's something that we know, coaches, they're only human. Eventually, that starts to weigh on you. How big of a game is it for North Carolina to go to Atlanta this weekend against Georgia Tech, a team that has been a bugaboo for the Tar Heels, and immediately put last week behind them and start thinking ahead to a very big part of the next 5 weeks for Carolina football?
Mike, obviously, again, I use that term a lot. Obviously, it's college football is a week-to-week game, just like pro football is. You can't allow one defeat to beat you twice. And the Carolina staff will do a great job preparing their team. It's tough now when you get down to it and you start playing people. Virginia had an open date. And as you said earlier, that's a huge rivalry between the University of North Carolina and Virginia. Virginia is one of the oldest universities in this country, as is the University of North Carolina. Oldest rivalry, or the second oldest rivalry in this country. So the wins and losses either way mean a great deal in that series. I think the critical thing is you go back and you look at when you're an undefeated team at the point that North Carolina was going against a one-win team in Virginia, and now they're almost repeating the same thing this week against a 3-win Georgia Tech team, if I'm not mistaken. The critical thing that you preach going into those games is don't give this team confidence. Let them know early that we're better than you are. Come out of the blocks quick. Let's get on them early. Let's get a 3 and out if we're on defense first. Let's go down and score and get points right away. Don't give them confidence. But you look back at the North Carolina game, and North Carolina was down 14-0 early, if I'm not mistaken. And then they surged back, and I'm sure Coach Brown has talked a great deal about the last 5 minutes of the first half and the first 5 minutes of the second half. Well, the last 5 minutes of the first half, North Carolina came back, went ahead 17-14 going into the halftime, came back out in the second half, lined up, went down, went ahead 24-14. And then all of a sudden the wheels came off at that point in time, and they couldn't get Virginia off the field to the tune of 228 yards rushing, and they could not maintain and stay on the field with their offense. So something ran amiss there in the communication process with the team, and I'm sure the Carolina coaches and Coach Brown are shouldering that and working on that up one side and down the other this week, because they've got to go repeat a similar scenario against the Georgia Tech team that we lost to a year. And I say we that right now because I was there, that Carolina lost to last year in a critical and similar situation.
Tar Heels with a big game at Georgia Tech. That game, 8 p.m. Saturday night on the ACC network. Duke is on the road at Louisville. number 20 Blue Devils, the number 18 Louisville Cardinals under Jeff Brom. This is a de facto elimination game, and Riley Leonard still a big question mark. My question to you is, if you're the head coach of the Blue Devils, Mike Elko, do you hold Riley Leonard out and hope that he can get back closer to 100%, or do you go ahead and play him because you feel like at this point he's your best chance to win?
Well, unfortunately, that's out of Mike's control at this point in time. That's in the control of the doctors and the trainers. And I saw very, very obviously, and again, I use that word again, on Saturday night, that Riley Leonard was begging to go back into the game on Saturday night. He is a great competitor and wanted Coach Elko to put him back into the game. Well, obviously, Coach Elko refused to put him back in the game, and I don't know if the trainers had told him that he was not ready to go back in and could not function at that point in time. That's inside their program. Those are inside things that we don't need to know about and never will know about. But they will make the right decision. You know, having been there a long time and knowing the training staff and the medical staff at Duke University, they will do what's right for Riley Leonard. If Riley Leonard shows up under center, or in the shotgun, I should say, on Saturday against Louisville, it will be because they thought he could play and not risk further injury to Riley Leonard. And Coach Elko will do the same thing. Hopefully for Duke's sake, that Riley can play, because the game turned around completely when he was not able to return to the game. Tough setting to put a young quarterback in a very tough place to play, and it was tough on him. He could not succeed at that point in time. The Duke offense could not stay on the field. Duke defense was out there way too long, and the game got out of control at that point. But the Duke football team that played for 3/4 of that game is good enough to beat anybody.
High ankle sprains are really tough to get better, so I don't think we'll see Riley Leonard back to being 100% if he's playing every week, or even if he's not. Those just take a lot of rest and a lot of rehab, and at this point in time, like you say, it's going to lay with the Duke Sport Medicine staff, and Coach Elko is obviously on the record as doing what's best for the player, where the consensus opinion comes in. Last thing, Coach, let's talk about Clemson and NC State. Now, this is the Textile Bowl. It is a big game. It's at Carter Finley Stadium, and it's another opportunity for NC State to shed all of the disappointment of their current 3-loss total and get that respect back against Clemson. Now, the Pack coming off an open date, whereas Clemson is coming off a loss to Miami. They're 4-3. I can't remember the last time that a Dabo Swinney coached Clemson team had 3 losses in the ACC. They might not have 3 losses this decade in the ACC before now. So this is really uncharted territory. At what point, if you're Clemson, do you worry about the mentality of your team just being in such uncharted waters?
Mike, they are at that point. If you go back over the last 13 games that the Clemson Tigers have played, what do you think their record is? 7 wins, 6 losses.
Yeah.
Over the last 13 games. Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I just read that this morning. So I would say that Clemson is at the point where they feel that they need to play at a much higher level than they're playing, and hopefully their players will make the decisions that need to be made to try to win games. And you know what I mean by that.
Absolutely. It's probably a lot easier to be here on the North Carolina Sports Network than in some of these coaching rooms right now, because this time of year, as you cross over into November, the pressure and the heat starts to get intense, doesn't it?
Well, it does. There's no doubt. And you're at they remember November is the saying that we all have. And so whatever you do in November will carry you into December and any possible championship hopes, because now we're down to rivalry games. We're at a point where we know who has a chance to legitimately be good, who is a championship contender, and who is a pretender at this point. So it's really important to play well at the end of October and all through November. It's just like I got a note from a fellow coach today talking about the Florida Georgia game. Notice I said Florida first, Florida Georgia game in Jacksonville, and he told me that Coach Spurrier had come out and spoken to the Florida team yesterday, and I understand that because there's no love lost by the head ball coach with the Georgia Bulldogs. I can assure you of that.
All right, Mike, thank you. When we come back, DG and I are going to go inside our XL Moving and Storage Big Four Games of the Week. That's next on the Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Pork. Sport Clips is like no other place you've ever gotten your haircut. Sports everywhere, TVs everywhere, playing sports, and guys, smart stylists who know how to give you the haircut you want and the haircut you need. You don't ever need an appointment. Walk-ins are welcome, and you'll walk out feeling like an MVP, guaranteed. Be sure to ask about the MVP experience, as it's something you just can't put into words. Awesome haircut, hot steam towel, invigorating shampoo, neck and shoulder treatment. It takes a haircut and turns it into an event. Sport Clips, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. The original Saltworks has been serving the Wilmington area for over 50 years. Owner Bob Hubbard and his staff create a welcome atmosphere to go along with their home-cooked breakfast and lunch that simply cannot be rivaled anywhere in North Carolina. Eggs, waffles, hot dogs, crab cakes, and the best grits in the state. The original Saltworks, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Welcome back to the Old North State Tailgate presented by NC Pork. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be with David Glenn. Don't forget to join us this Saturday in Raleigh for NC State and Clemson. We'll be at Backyard Bistro beginning at 11. The David Glenn Show, 9 a.m. every Thursday on the North Carolina Sports Network. This week's featured guest is a look at ACC basketball as DG and Mike Waddell will talk all things ACC hoops from ACC tip-off earlier this week in Charlotte. All right, now back to the gridiron. Big games this week and our Excel Moving and Storage Big Four Games of the week. And we'll start with the big one for the Blue Devils. It feels like they're all big for Duke every single week. Another top 20 showdown for Duke. The 5-2 Blue Devils will be at the 6-1 Louisville Cardinals this Saturday. And for the winner, they'll take another step, DG, toward getting to that ACC championship game in Charlotte.
Yeah, Chris, unlike some of my close friends, I don't typically look at things through a gambling lens, at least not primarily. But think of it this way. We're not sure, again, whether Riley Leonard is healthy enough to start at quarterback for the Blue Devils, given the re-injured ankle that happened at Florida State. Mike Elko is calling him day-to-day again. Before State, day-to-day meant he didn't play. Before FSU, day-to-day meant he did play, at least for a while. So we're not sure about that very important variable. One of the best running backs in the entire ACC is a guy named Jawar Jordan of Louisville. He has been hurt. He's day-to-day. Louisville has nice backups, but they're not Jawar Jordan, probable first-team All-ACC type guy, up there behind Amarian Hampton of UNC among the league leaders in rushing yards per game. He's just an incredibly explosive player. So how do you or I or anybody else or the wise guys in Vegas, put a read on this game, not knowing if those two fundamentally important guys are going to play? I don't know. What I do know is whoever wins remains one of the favorites to face Florida State in the ACC title game. If you lose this Louisville-Duke matchup, you fall into the ranks of the two conference losses, and there's a whole bunch of teams sitting there with two conference losses. Of course, if you get to 7-1, you're going to play in the ACC title game. We might end up in 6-2 tiebreakers the way this thing is going. So I do think they're both legitimate top 25 teams. They're in the rankings and deservedly so. Louisville's 6-1. They had that shocking loss against Pitt. Duke is 5-2. Obviously, quality losses in both cases. Notre Dame at home and then Florida State on the road. With Riley Leonard, I think Duke wins this game, even though it's at Louisville. Without Riley Leonard, I think it's Louisville's game, but it's also a matchup between two ACC Coach of the Year candidates. Mike Elko of Duke was that last year and has a chance again this year. And the first-year Cardinals coach, Jeff Brom, a Louisville alum and guy who had some success at Purdue in the Big Ten as a head coach. Despite that loss at Pitt, he has the Cardinals playing really good on both sides of the ball. maybe even a little bit more balanced than the Blue Devils are right now. And given Louisville's relatively desirable remaining schedule, you can't roll your eyes at the thought of Louisville in year one of Jeff Brom making it all the way to the ACC title game. This is a big one. Cardinals are a 4-point favorite.
And in the Duke case, whether Riley Leonard plays or not, I think important for the Blue Devils to sustain some drives too. It seemed to me the Duke defense on the field an awful lot in Tallahassee last Saturday night.
Correct. And they gave up 21 points in the fourth quarter because they were worn down a little bit. It's a really good defense, but eventually Florida State was good enough at the line of scrimmage that everybody got worn down, I think, on both sides of the ball for Duke. And then the Riley Leonard re-injury kind of made the wheels come off. But, Louisville is not the caliber of opponent that Florida State is, but Louisville is playing solid defense. They have a veteran. He's actually a sixth-year quarterback in Jack Plummer. They have one of the best wideouts in the league in Jamari Thrash. And if Jordan plays at running back, that shows you why they've actually been well-balanced offense, defense, and special teams under Jeff Brom. In this league this year with Louisville's schedule, it's not at all unforeseeable that we could end up with a Louisville-Florida State ACC title game, but this is a big hurdle for both Duke and Louisville. Again, the winner of this one might put themselves in the driver's seat to be that opponent for FSU in Charlotte.
All right, speaking of the Seminoles, they come to our backyard this weekend, undefeated, 7-0, and they are at 4-3 Wake Forest. The Deacs coming off that thrilling win at home over Pittsburgh last Saturday.
Yeah, Dave Clawson has actually beaten the Seminoles a couple times in recent years. I think it's 2-2 in the last four matchups between Wake and FSU, which most people might not guess. But I'm going to test your memory, Chris. You're a little younger than I. In the Naked Gun movie decades ago, the acclaimed opera singer Enrico Palazzo, while working as a home plate umpire, there is a sports angle here, saved the Queen of England's life. She was going to be assassinated by a guy who appeared to be Reggie Jackson walking in with a gun from the outfield. In the Wake Forest Pitt football game last week, it was third-string quarterback Santino Marucci who saved Wake Forest from being upset at home by a lowly Pittsburgh team not carrying any weapons, unlike Reggie Jackson, but certainly putting the Demon Deacons bowl eligibility in jeopardy. Santino Marucci saved that assassination attempt, prevented it from happening. So the Deacs survive and get to 4-3 with that late comeback. Remember, Mitch Griffiths, struggling starting quarterback, was hurt. His backup, Michael Kern, was hurt. So the third stringer, a young guy from Jacksonville, Florida, is thrown into the fire. Wake is pretty solid on defense. They have a really good running back in Damon Claiborne, really good wideouts, including Jamal Banks. They just haven't had the trigger man, and they were not great offensively against Pitt. But Marucci minimizes bad plays, let the guys around him shine, and came up big with that play in the final minute. So I don't like this year's Deacs team against this year's Florida State team, but given that recent history and the genius of Dave Clawson and the fact that game is in Winston-Salem, you never say never. I don't like any of the Deacs quarterbacks against that FSU defense. That's going to be a problem.
All right, game 3, North Carolina coming off the loss at home to Virginia, trying to bounce back, but they got to go on the road this week to Atlanta to take on 3-4 Georgia Tech.
Yeah, for those who haven't seen the Yellow Jackets, they're the opposite of what my mental picture of Georgia Tech football has been in recent years. Lately, it's been hide your eyes bad offense at Georgia Tech. No quarterback of significance, pretty decent defense often. It's the opposite of that this year. So the Tar Heels challenge is, to me, somewhat similar as it was against Virginia, except it's on the road this time at a 3-4 Georgia Tech team. The Yellow Jackets have a Texas A&M transfer at quarterback named Haynes King, and he's throwing the ball around in a way the Jackets have not done for quite a while. But the Jackets are really vulnerable defensively. Now, we would have described Virginia that way probably. Sure. And Carolina lost the battle of field possession with their backup punter kicking 13-yard punts, and they lost the battle of time of possession with UVA exploiting Carolina's defensive front and just keeping Drake May and that UNC offense on the sidelines. Georgia Tech is going to have a similar game plan to that. and Carolina's front, and I don't mean Power Eccles and Cedric Gray at linebacker. They've been plenty good. They're on my all-ACC team that I posted at ncsportsnetwork.com this week. The linebackers are plenty good at Carolina. The secondary is not great, but often good enough. The front four just needs to make more plays. Like Kamen Rucker does it at defensive end. He needs more help from his friends, as that old song goes. Otherwise, Carolina is going to continue to be inconsistent. Georgia Tech is a team the Tar Heels should beat, home or away. They failed that test a year ago, and their season unraveled as a result. This year's, of course, shocker was against UVA last week. The Tar Heels have to bounce back emotionally. They have to bounce back with their special teams play. They have to bounce back with their play calling. They have to not drop so many balls for Drake May. And May himself needs to make a few more plays and average, more than 20-some points if the Heels are going to get a much needed road victory as an 11-point favorite in Atlanta.
You like the Heels in this one, DG?
I do. There's a chance. We just saw why only Florida State, I won't say they're not upset proof at Florida State, but I don't think the Seminoles are at high risk at Wake Forest, for example. Whereas you and I have discussed Louisville, it didn't shock me. Did I pick Louisville to beat Pitt? I did. Was I knocked out of my chair because they lost to Pitt? No, because Louisville is not dominant the way Florida State is. Same with the Tar Heels. They're an upset risk because they don't have a dominating offensive line and they don't have a dominating defensive front four. They need those guys to play better. And when the offensive line at Carolina complements Omari and Hampton, who's a heck of a running back behind any line, and then that complements what Drake May obviously can do in the passing game, there's no reason the Heels shouldn't score 40 points against a Georgia Tech defense that's giving up more than 30 points per game. There are 3 bad defenses in the ACC this year. One is Boston College, one is Virginia, and the Tar Heels only got 27 points against that bad defensive Virginia team. And the third is this Georgia Tech team. 27 points is not enough in modern-day college football when you think you have a Heisman-caliber quarterback and a first-team All-ACC running back and superstar transfer Tez Walker at wide receiver. 27 points back in 1972 would have been plenty. In 2023, to call yourself a good offense, you need to put up numbers against vulnerable defenses. That means 40 points, and that's one of the challenges for the Heels in Atlanta.
All right, our final game of our Big Four this week, presented as always by Excel Moving and Storage. It's an intriguing matchup, maybe not the flair that it's had in recent years. 4-3 Clemson at 4-3 NC State. Clemson coming off that double overtime loss at Miami. Really weird ending to that game with the play call there. Cole Klubnik, I'm not quite sure what was going on. And then NC State off the bye week last week. The Wolfpack trying to get some things figured out offensively for the final stretch of the season. And if you had this as a 2:30 game on the CW when the season started, I would have probably taken you to Vegas.
Yeah, you were being kind when you said this might not be the matchup that we envisioned back in August. It's 4-3 Clemson at 4-3 NC State. Obviously, both were capable of something better. We said going into that Labor Day matchup against Duke that Clemson, we could not assume that they were the juggernaut that they've often been because we didn't know much about Cade Klubnik. And seriously, he has been no better than an average quarterback in the Atlantic Coast Conference so far this season. Clemson's defense is for real. NC State's defense is pretty good, not quite as good. But both of these teams obviously have really struggled offensively. What fascinates me here is the human element. I think the move to MJ Morris, even though he played poorly at Duke and is inexperienced, I think it gives a breath of fresh air to the Wolfpack. It's kind of a reboot on their season. And maybe they rally in front of the Carter Finley crowd and try to beat a team that they've very rarely threatened, much less beaten. The human element on the other side, Chris, is fascinating to me because, as you referred to there kind of obliquely, Cade Klubnik did not run the play sent in from the sidelines with the game on the line against Miami. We have probably a lot of people who played middle school or high school or whatever level of football, Pop Warner League. That is one of the biggest no-nos, as I was taught. If there's one thing you're going to do, it's run what was sent in from the sideline. The idea of freelancing may come into play when you have 3 Super Bowl rings or something like that. But not when you're 11 years old, and I'm pretty sure not when you're 21 years old either. How does that affect the locker room? how does it affect the Clemson locker room that a lot of those 5th and 6th year guys told us in August when we interviewed them at ACC Media Day that they stayed to try to make a run at a national title? Well, we know that's over. I mean, you can't even get to the ACC title game. So does that elite talent on Clemson's defense play at that elite level? Or do they have like one eye on whether it's the NFL or a pharmaceutical sales job that they have waiting for them in December? You know, football is a game of face in the fan intensity. And I'd be willing to bet that State will meet in front of their fans with, you know, a good season, not great, but a good season still within reach. And MJ Morris, inexperienced, but can be an electric quarterback, and a solid foundation on defense. There's no doubt that State is going to play hard and play with focus. I don't know what to expect from Clemson. Tigers aren't used to being 4-3. It's got to be divisive in the locker room when your quarterback's not running what's running from the sidelines. Your offensive line is not very good. Both of these defenses are capable of exploiting the opposite offense. And if I'm Peyton Wilson and the NC State defense, I'm saying to my teammates, we can score defensively on Cade Klubnik and that Clemson offense. That gets the crowd into it. That takes some pressure off of MJ Morris. And even if you don't score on defense, get a couple turnovers, give MJ Morris some short fields. Just give that offense something to feel good about. I don't care if it's an 11-yard drive after a fumble or an interception. That's the recipe for State to beat Clemson. It's somewhat similar to the journey and the route that Duke took to beat Clemson back on Labor Day night. All that's easier said than done, but I think the Wolfpack is capable at least of pulling that off. Clemson's just an unpredictable variable in terms of, does Dabo Swinney keep that locker room together? This is a different challenge than what he's had for most of the last decade plus as the leader of that program.
And, you know, it's interesting. The winner of this game is obviously going to be 5-3, one game closer to bowl eligibility. Let's look at it from a Clemson perspective. Let's say the Tigers don't win this game. You've still got challenging games against North Carolina and against South Carolina down the stretch. You fall to 4-4. It's a different conversation for Clemson then.
It is. And when I watch Clemson's defense play when their heart is in it, I think they can run the table with the exception of that Notre Dame game. In other words, you know, I think they're much better than South Carolina. I think they're, at least at Death Valley, they're going to be better than a North Carolina, better than a Georgia Tech. I think they are better and more well-balanced than NC State this week. Notre Dame on November 4th is a different animal. But, you know, to your point, if you lose at NC State, where the Wolfpack crowd is going to be jacked up, and you just want, they've had a couple close calls against the Tigers, and they just want to get over that hump. You know, they're stuck, no more divisional format, obviously, but they were stuck in that division. Why hasn't State been in an ACC title game when Wake had, or Duke and Carolina have at least been there? Well, Duke and Carolina were in coastal chaos. State was stuck in the Atlantic with either a Florida State dominant a decade ago or Clemson dominant for most of the last decade. They want to knock off the Tigers. They want to send Peyton Wilson to the next level in style. You know, they want to claim a win at Carter Finley Stadium over what has been the best, no doubt about it, program in the ACC and a two-time national champion under Dabo Swinney. What the Clemson Tigers mentality is in this game is the fascinating part for me, because if they lose at State, what we've just been discussing only gets worse. That snowball only grows in its complexity. Whereas if you beat State, you know, maybe you look at that Notre Dame as the Notre Dame game as kind of your regular season Super Bowl, and maybe you envision trying to go 9-3, win your bowl game, and you keep that amazing streak, or you add to that long decade-plus streak of winning 10 or more games virtually every year under Dabo Swinney. So some goals are still in play for Clemson, but really, by their standards, even their smaller goals will be done if they don't beat the Wolfpack on Saturday afternoon.
You want to make a pick in this game?
I'll take Clemson, but I have no confidence in it. Like, I would run from the betting window on both Duke Louisville for those injury-related reasons and State Clemson for those human elements, if you want to call it that. I find those things really hard to predict at this stage of the season. You know, earlier in the year, everybody has high hopes. Everybody's trying hard. Most people are healthy because, you know, you had an off season, and preseason camp is not quite as intense as the true violent nature of football Saturdays. You get to late October and November, man, it's whose heart is fully in it the way it would have been in it in September. That's a human element that college football coaches lose sleep over sometimes, and they're not always sure what they're going to get from the inside. So I sure as heck don't know from the outside. I think Clemson is the better team. I know it sounds weird because they're only 4-3. I still believe they're one of the best defensive teams in the country. When I watch those dudes play, man, Tyler Davis up front and two of their linebackers are big time players, Jeremiah Trotter and Barrett Carter, RJ Mickens, Nate Wiggins at cornerback. They're good at all three. Their 11 on defense has more than at least a half a dozen that are going to play in the NFL. That's how talented they are on that side of the ball. Now, as we've seen, on a different scale at places like ECU, where your offense is so bad, it bleeds through the whole locker room, bleeds into all three phases of the game. Clemson's offense is not that bad. I mean, they still have two good running backs. They have a couple of good wide receivers. Mediocre offensive line by Clemson standards. And then nothing like a Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence at quarterback, obviously. Dabo and his new offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, don't have as many of the ideal ingredients that most Clemson teams have had offensively. When you have a shaky line and a young quarterback, that's an unpredictable formula, and it's gotten them stuck at 4-3 right now. Either Peyton Wilson and the Wolfpack defense exploits that, or the Clemson Tigers are going to win. So that's why, if forced to pick, I'll take the Tigers, but I'm not betting my lunch money on either one of those.
All right, time for our closing thought presented by Organize for Success. DG, get us out of here on your closing thought today.
Yeah, I'm excited that we still have fun topics to discuss, even as Mike Waddell and I are in Charlotte for ACC Basketball Media Day, and gradually, obviously, college sports fans' attention goes to basketball after these months of football being first in the conversation. I'm excited to see if NC Central can make another run to an HBCU national championship, and whether the Eagles can have the first top 10 FCS finish in the history of their program. I'm excited to see Western, which we just got an eyeful of last week, can make the FCS playoffs and finish. They haven't finished in the top 25, Chris, since 1984, the Catamounts. That would be a huge step in the right direction, even though they just took a step back from seeking a Southern Conference title with that loss to Furman. And as we said to start the show, Duke and Carolina, despite those ugly losses last week, still have almost all of their biggest dreams within reach. It will not be easy, but it's possible. And at Duke and Carolina in football, we don't often say that entering the month of November. Oh, by the way, Lenore Ryan still hasn't lost as a Division II program here in our backyard. So I'm still following a half a dozen of the top college football stories in our backyard, even as we're gradually turning the page to what should be another really exciting college basketball season here.
All right, that'll do it for us this week. The Old North State Tailgate is an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Our foundational partner for the North Carolina Sports Network and our show is the North Carolina Pork Council. Thanks again to Mike Waddell and Jimmy Collins for that great conversation earlier today. For David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards, signing off for this edition of the Old North State Tailgate, the official tailgating soundtrack of the 2023 football season, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. We'll talk to you next week.